Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be getting started on a two-part series dedicated to the DHC-4 Caribou. Now, this is an incredible aircraft that doesn't need a lot of introduction from me. It was optimized to be short takeoff and landing. You can throw paratroopers out the back. You can land at just about anything. The performance on this thing is absolutely staggering, and it's a neat piece of work. It's actually got a lot of really, really neat buttons and bells and whistles and little switches you wouldn't expect in places. And that's why I've decided to dedicate a couple different videos to the purposes of showing this thing off. Let's get started. So first things first, you climb inside here, and one of the things you'll notice is my head is facing straight. For those of you who just bought this aircraft, you'll notice that your head is sitting like this. If you want to go ahead and change that, I put together a video a little while ago that can allow you to adjust it. I fly in VR a lot, and when I have to do this with my neck in order to fly the plane, that gets a little old, but I do have a video about adjusting your camera angle. It's pretty easy to do. So anyway, looking around inside this thing, wow. You definitely know that we're dealing with something from the 1950s and 60s here. A lot of very, very traditional gauges. One thing I'll actually do is go ahead and close that real fast so you can see it. We have a lot of interesting bells and whistles on this one. And I did take a look at the actual POH for it. I was able to dig it up online. Kind of a fun read. Some of the procedures are a little different for this plane than they are in the real world, and we'll kind of mention those as we go. One thing you're going to notice, let me go ahead and zoom in here, is the fact that our standard 6 looks a little different. One thing you'll notice is we have our airspeed indicator, not the world's most precise airspeed indicator. This is 60, 55 knots, right where my mouse is. Now, one of the interesting things is if you actually go up a little bit, you'll observe that there is a second airspeed indicator. This one is your short field approach speed airspeed indicator. Now, one of the things I thought this was an AOA indicator. It's not an AOA indicator. It's actually a copy of this instrument, but zoomed in. And now the way this one works, and the reason I'm bringing this up right away, is the fact you have two different symbols here. This particular diamond here refers to you being at all-up weight of 26,000. This little triangle refers to an all-up weight of 28,500. So if you want to think about it another way, if you're light, use this one to approach. If you're heavier, use this one to approach. So it's actually pretty cool how that works. The other thing you're going to notice is we have a pull to cage and everything like that. We have our HSI, which is pretty straightforward, and you can tell we're in the Army now because we have ourselves an oxygen regulator pressure demand. I'm actually going to flip that on right away just to kind of get that going. So if I kind of shoot to the right here, our middle panel here looks kind of similar to things you've seen in other aircraft. It's just slightly more complicated. I like to call this sort of the engine panel here. This is where all the critical information for our stuff is going to be. You've got your fuel quantity gauges, left and right. The way this one works is pretty straightforward. You have two different engines here. We have the ability to have our fuel tank selector right here. If we want to shut our fuel off, we could snap it to that button. You could, of course, pick one particular fuel tank in the event that you need it. We also have these two fuel boost pumps here, and that's where they're going to be located. You're probably going to want to use those for the purposes of getting started and climbing. Of course, we have a high mode also in the event that we lose pressure or lose one of our primary. Due south of that, of course, by due south, I mean straight down, we have ourselves the de-icing controls. There was a little bit of an issue with this. There's a recent bug report on this particular section, but the controls for that are located there. Swinging over here to the right, you're probably familiar with some of these gauges here. We are a big old radial engine powered aircraft here. This is not, some turboprop or anything like that. As a resultant, you'll notice we have our manifold pressure and our RPM. The nice thing that they did for us to make our lives much simpler is they provided us with a couple different ranges, which makes it able to immediately know what your power settings are. You'll notice there's the red line for absolute maximum. There's the green range, which is max continuous, and then there's the blue range, which is your cruise, basically. So the reason that's so helpful to us is rather than running over to the manual, which we certainly could and read the exact numbers, we can actually come in here and say, okay, so if I want to take off, I'm going to be at maximum RPM, maximum 50, but now if I want to climb, I just go ahead and have to set myself to the top of the green arc here, and I know I don't have to stress about my different values here. We are a very, very strong supercharged engine here, as you probably could observe. And when it comes time to cruise, look at how simple it is. We just pull down to the top of the blue arc, and then we don't even have to stress about it. Below that, we have our oil pressure, oil temperature, fuel pressure. We have our cylinder head temperature. Notice we have a huge safe range of cylinder head temperature. I find that this aircraft runs a lot hotter than I would expect it to, especially if you're not at really, really high power settings and high temperatures. I think that's just kind of the nature of this calculation. It hasn't caused any damage yet, but just be mindful that you will see this get up pretty high, especially oil temperature. Directly to the right of that, we have our generator switches. Now, one of the mistakes I've read a lot of people have done when I was reading around on the forums is people forget to turn their generators on. Now, in this particular aircraft, see how these two switches are covered? They're actually not on. So if you were to start this aircraft and start taxiing away, your instruments will fail in about 15 minutes because we have no electrical power because we never actually generated it. This aircraft has a generator, not an alternator, which means we have to activate them, and we have to make sure we have enough electrical power to actually get these things flowing. Directly below that, you're going to have your AC. This is your inverter. In the event that you need to lose the main inverter, we can flip over to the back inverter. Best way to think about this is DC, this is AC. You know, bells. Moving along, we have, of course, if you want to turn some lights on in the back to tell people to get out of your plane, you got the switches for that. We have an oxygen demand regulator for the guy in the right seat here, which is pretty straightforward. It's, like I said, nothing too scary. Now, the next set I'm going to take a look at is right above our head. This is where you're going to have all of your controls. Now, one of the things I'm not a fan of, and Grumman, I'm looking at you, Goose, is we have a lot of our critical engine control things above our head. Now, I don't know about you, but I fly in the real world, and my arm will get tired if I have to reach up over my head the entire flight. But what you'll see here is we have our pretty standard set of equipment. One thing you want to watch out for is this gust lock here. You can't actually push the throttle forward unless you knock the gust lock out of the way. So one of the things people complained about is it doesn't have enough power on takeoff. Did you take the gust lock off? Above that, we have our landing gear handle up there. Swinging over here, we have our prop as well as our mixture. I'm actually going to set those now. I'm going to need those in a few moments anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and deal with that. Above our heads, of course, we have our landing lights if we need to pop those on. We also have our ignition switches. I'm actually going to set them to the on position. Technically, we're supposed to prime them and snap them on. I guess we'll do it correctly. Oh, well. You also have your flap handle. It's kind of a neat flap handle, I'm not going to lie. You have to push this little finger down in order to click it to the position that it needs to go. Directly behind that, of course, we have our carburetor heat. Very straightforward. You can see we turn this on to make it hotter, push this down to go ahead and cool it off. Obviously, carburetor heat, you only have to really pay attention to that in the event that you're in the critical icing range, which is kind of this zone right here. This is why I like having co-pilot, because they can worry about that while I'm kind of cruising around, kind of a thing like that. Over on this side, like I said, we have our landing gear. We got a little spotlight swinging over to this side. Now you can see that right up tippy top here, we have our control to go ahead and set the tension. Nothing we need to worry about. But one of the things I appreciate is they put all your numbers that you're going to need to follow right on the side of everything. Next up, we'll go ahead and take a look in the middle here. This is kind of called the emergency panel, hence having the little kind of stripes going around the outside here. We have our ability to feather our engines. That's this big switch right here. We also have, but we don't have it working, this would be our fire extinguishers. We have the fuel cutoff switches, which are very critical. It's one per side per engine, kind of a thing like that. It's a kind of a mess that it just doesn't work that way, but I don't mind too much. Sitting in the middle, of course, we have emergency brake. It's just there for entertainment. Now we'll go ahead and float up behind us. There's actually a pretty neat system over here. This is the heating system for this aircraft. And it's an old school gas heater, which I love those. There's a technical name for those, but I always forget the name of it. But basically the idea here is that you set your temperature over on this side. You select a mode, which you can. And if you come down here, we actually have the ability to go ahead and turn on our little gas heater. This one's actually pretty straightforward, which I think is easy. You got a master switch, you turn that on, you turn on the pump, that's it. And then you just set the temperature to whatever you want to. And if there's an emergency, of course, please come over here and shut this off so we don't melt. But you can see they actually tell you everything you need to know as far as how to get this thing started. It's really there for show, but I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. One thing that is not for show back here, though, or if you float to this one, you have this cool little panel that allows you to play with stuff in the back seat. So if I actually were to stick my head down just a tiny bit, you've got your no smoking is fastened seatbelts light, but you also have these switches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up these two switches, and what you're going to see is a couple different options here. We have the ramp, we have the cargo door, and we have the 15-degree override switch. So the way this works is actually really straightforward. What we can do here is we can open this if we click up the switch. And what that will do is that will actually open the back door for this particular craft. Now, what you're probably observing is this thing is not moving. The reason it's not moving is because we haven't turned on the master switch. So once you turn on the master switch, you'll notice that now they actually can open without having a battery. Now, the fun thing here is you can leave this thing open the entire flight if you're one of those people. You can also, of course, hit this little override limit thing. And what that will cause, let me actually zoom out a little bit. It'll cause this ramp to go to some extremely low, dangerous level, which that's what your desired level for that particular tool is. You can go ahead and do that. Like I said, it's just kind of a neat little thing if you're like pretending to do like the whole paratrooper thing. Just remember, after hitting these switches, you're supposed to shut them off, and you're supposed to click that switch off when you're done with it. Another fun thing is if you go ahead, have the ability to actually float your head around, you can actually float back here and play paratrooper. You can do one of these things, and you can say that, war is hell and all that other kind of stuff, act out whatever particular fantasy you're interested in. Like I said, I just think it's really, really cool that they took the time to model this little sucker. And closed. Nice. Now I'm going to put my hand anywhere near where that comes off. All right, let's go shut all our switches off here. We don't need this right now. We'll pop that off. Cool. So now we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. This aircraft, like I said, the real-world policies/techniques are a little different than what they talk about in the knee board, and they're also definitely a little bit different from what you actually need to do. As always, you can always press the Control A key to get this thing rumbly rumbly if you need. It's basically the same concept for every aircraft. It's just massively simplified because you don't have a lot of extra buttons on here that you need to stress out about, which, like I said, to an extent, I think that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So let's go ahead and take a quick look around. We're just going to go just to make sure everything's fine here. You can turn the yoke back on, turn the yoke back off, depending exactly what you need to do. Unfortunately, I can't hit that window, which is a bummer. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and float our heads down on here. And we have a couple different switches here. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the master start. And of course, on the right-hand side, you're going to see the battery. When you click that switch, you're going to get a bunch of angry letters here that are basically going to announce the fact that everything's broken because everything isn't working at the moment. We're getting a low hydraulic pressure warning, which of course would affect us if our brakes weren't already set. You're going to get all sorts of things. Your landing gear could, of course, somebody forgot to fix it. I got to put a squawk on that because that is not working. I'm going to swing over here. I'm going to pop on my anti-collision light just to let everybody know that, hey, we're about to go ahead and get this party started. Fortunately, we don't have a formation light, so we can't do this. I love how you can change the lightness of the brightness of that. Flip on the navigation lights. We're just going to go outside real quick and make sure everything's working. Look at the size of the tail on this thing. Amazing. And now we're ready to go ahead and get this thing started. Startup is very, very simple. It's a good old-fashioned radial engine. So the way this works is you need 16 hands to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and crack the throttle. The manual in the real plane tells you you're supposed to start with the mixture off. If you do that, you will not get the plane to start in flight sim. It's just kind of the way it works. So we have a couple different switches down here. We want to flip the master switch first. We have, well, which one do we want to start? We have our vibration option. We can't actually use this. This isn't operative. So if you try to follow the real book, you're going to find it doesn't work. And then we have the prime switch. So the way this is supposed to work is you hit the starter, wait a few moments, hit the primer, and then go ahead and get your igniters at the same time. You're supposed to pull it through a certain number of blades. So we're going to go ahead and now clip the starter. That's going to go ahead and start turning the propeller. We're going to go ahead and hit the primer. Make sure you prime the correct side. Give it a few moments for the blades to go around, and then we're going to go ahead and engage the magneto here. Now, if you notice, our engine did not start, like I was saying. So like it's a lot, like 15 different fingers on here. So what I actually do for this one, I'm actually going to go get this. I'll slightly modify, like I was saying. I'm going to go ahead and get us a little bit of fuel pressure first. Let's start there. Make sure our mixture is set. Make sure we've got our thing cracked. And a much, much safer way to start this thing, set the prime handle, crank it. And you'll notice, it starts up perfectly. It's just kind of one of those things where it's like, you want it to work a certain way, but it doesn't quite work. And it obviously shut off your prime switch. Now, if I wanted to, I could sit here and prime this one for a few moments. But realistically, what you're supposed to do is start it on the primer and then kick on the fuel. But it's just how the way flight sim kind of works, sort of thing like that. So again, easiest way, just reach above your head, set the magneto, crank it over to start. Like I said, it's a lot less exciting when you do it that way. But it will start for you. And as you can see, boop, no problem. It started. So like I said, not terribly exciting. Not terribly exciting. All right, important step now. Now that the engine is rumbly, I'm going to go ahead and set 1,000 RPM, which is just kind of universal. We're going to float down here, and they have these lovely warning lights to tell you you've already goofed up. And I'm actually going to set both of these generators on and close those switches. One of the things we can do is if you look up here, we just want to confirm the fact that our generators are indeed working. I can see that we have a couple amps coming off of them. Not like lots, like 20 amps per engine here. So that's not bad. But if you were to look above those and you notice that I shut this off, do you see how it's discharging and one generator is taking all the work here? You want to make sure both of these are on just to kind of keep things nice and balanced. And obviously my inverter is working perfectly fine here as well, so I'm not going to stress. Cylinder temperature's coming up, pressure's coming up, everything looks pretty good. Once we're started and the engine's stable, you can actually shut the fuel boost pump off on here. The reason being is that, like I said, we don't really need it for anything else. This is also a good time to go ahead and set up any other electronics that you need. We have ourselves our little GPS down here, which is a nice touch. Some people, of course, say, hey, why don't we have a autopilot in here? Because we just don't have one. Just isn't an autopilot for it. Coming down here, of course, so you can also set up your radios. Fortunately, these are the fun radios. We don't have those. We also have the ADF radios located in the middle, but we'll take a look at that a little later on. You also have your so important tools right here. This would be your tachyon. Unfortunately, they didn't program it with a working tachyon. Kind of a shame because, it's kind of something that goes with these types of aircraft. But you do have your two conventional radios down there. So that's it for getting this thing started. In our next video, we'll go taxi, takeoff, navigation, landing, kind of a thing like that. But other than that, enjoy.